Thank you, Madam Chair and members. SB 734 would extend for 2 years the sunset date on the expedited judicial review provisions in AB 900, which was passed in 2011. Currently, the Jobs and Economic Improvement through Environmental Leadership Act of 2011 authorizes the governor to certify projects that meet certain environmental standards and create highly skilled jobs that pay prevailing and living wages. This authority is set to end on January 1st of 2017. SB 734 extends the governor's authority to certify a project to January 1st of 2018. It also states that the certification of a project expires and is no longer valid if the lead agency fails to approve a certified project before January 1st of 2019. SB 734 ensures that contractors are paying prevailing wage to all construction workers employed on an eligible project. Finally, SB 734 allows multifamily residential projects to provide vehicle parking spaces priced, rented, or purchased separately in certain instances. SB 734 has absorbable state costs, and the benefit is increased jobs, leading to increased economic growth and recovery in California. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Witnesses in support.
Madam Chair, members, Cesar Diaz on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council. This program is meant for developers or private projects that are meeting a higher standard, that are looking to build and actually looking forward to move forward on an application for construction. It could be mixed use, commercial. There have been several applications that have been coming through. We believe the extension of the program will continue to allow the OPR to receive more applications and analyze them to make sure they're meeting high environmental standards. And in doing so,
Second.
they are then also giving a truncated judicial review. So we ask for your support. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. Paul Bauer on behalf of 5827 West Sunset in support of the bill.
Thank you. Any other speakers in support? In opposition? Department of Finance?
The Department of Finance is neutral on this bill as amended May 19th in the Assembly. The extension of the sunset date from Jan 1, 2017 to Jan 1, 2019 does not have any fiscal impact on the state.
Great. There's a motion by Ms. Eggman, second by Mr. Quirk. If there's no questions, you're closed.
Thank you very much.
And that gets out on a B roll call. Thank you. Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray, AB 2863 enjoys a due pass as amended. And I'm going to ask that we try to keep, we're going to allow presentations, but if we can try to keep the presentations to the amendments since we heard the bill last week. An explanation for the committee after a lot of back and forth. Mr. Gray has accepted the fiscal amendments I'm sure he will talk about, including the 10% for the state, a reduction in the fees or an offset on the fees based on taxes, and a $20 million fee or extension of not participating for certain providers. Because he is the policy chair, we traded amendments on the policy consideration of suitability, and those are the 4 amendments he'll be taking today, and the reasons of why we have accepted that. He did accept the fiscal the amendments we deemed to be fiscal, and provided a substitute policy amendment. When you're ready.
Certainly, thank you, Madam Chair, members. I will keep my opening comments short. Obviously, we debated the merits of this bill at length last week. We've spent the past week negotiating with certainly the committee chairperson as well as the committee staff on those amendments. We are going to take 3 out of the 4 amendments that were proposed prior, and we have 1 substitute amendment on suitability having to inserting a 2006 date into the bill. With this amendment, we have strong suitability language in the bill that both identifies a 2011 date, after which it was very clear that unless you were authorized by a state or federal jurisdiction that you shouldn't be operating internet poker here in the United States, and a 2006 to 2011 period where there's a lack of clarity, and we are proposing with the committee amendments to either have a 5-year waiting period and or a $20 million fine. Happy to take those amendments. Appreciate the committee chair's work as well as committee staff's work, and we'll answer any questions.
And we'll allow for 2 supporters to speak for 2 minutes each.
Sabrina Nak-Japanpour from the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. I am treasurer for my tribal council. First of all, I'd like to give Adam Gray a special thank you in giving me the opportunity to be here today. San Manuel continues to take an ongoing stand in the AB 2863, and with great strength we continue to support it, to support this bill, and we ask for your support as well.
Thank you. Barry?
Madam Chair and members, Barry Broad on behalf of the Teamsters and the Jockeys Guild. I just would like to say that with regard to these amendments, that this bill continues to be an example of how to do things right in terms of moving a complicated issue forward. We are now at a point where the horse racing industry is supportive of the bill. The vast majority of Indian tribes are in support of this bill. The card industry is in this bill. The online poker folks are in support of this bill. And we are moving towards resolution of all the issues. And I think you are all to be commended for this bill, and we very much urge an aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional supporters?
Madam Chair and members, Caitlin Vega for the California Labor Federation, also here in support.
Megan Loper on behalf of Commerce Casino in support.
Scott Coven on behalf of the Morongo Band of Mission Indians in support.
Kathy Christian on behalf of the United Auburn Indian Community in support.
Pat Moran on behalf of the California Thoroughbred Trainers in support.
Jerome Encinas with the Rincon Band in support.
Ed Manning on behalf of Hawaiian Gardens Casino in support.
Erin Norwood on behalf of Churchill Downs also in support.
David Kim on behalf of Bay 101 in support.
Brian Lundgren on behalf of Communities for California Card Rooms in support.
Robin Black on behalf of the Thoroughbred Owners of California and the California Thoroughbred Breeders Association in support.
Anthony Gonsalves on behalf of Del Mar Thoroughbred Club and Oak Tree Racing that races at Alameda County Fair in support.
Renee Bayardo, SEIU California in support.
Matt Lasky on behalf of Oceans 11 and Crystal Casino in support.
Speakers in opposition. And we're going to have the same situation here. 2 speakers, 2 minutes each, if we keep it to the amendments rather than rehash from last week. Or we can rehash. You get 2 minutes.
Chairman, how are you?
Hey. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Leland Kinter. I'm the chairman of the Yochadihi Wintu Nation, a federally recognized Indian tribe located in Northern California, about 45 miles northwest of Sacramento. Our tribe owns and operates Cache Creek Casino Resort, which employs some 2,300 people, making it the largest private employer in Yolo County. It has been claimed that Yochadihi opposes any form of legislation authorizing internet poker, and that no bill will satisfy our tribe. This is false. What is true is that our position is driven not by profit motive or a particular business model or even a desire to align with a certain business partner. Rather, Yochadihi's position is driven by principles that respect the heightened gaming rights with which the people of California have entrusted tribal governments, and that comport with a sound public policy that is protective, thoughtful, and deliberate. We received the latest amendments yesterday, and we remain opposed to this bill. The amendments fail to address the use of tainted assets, specifically the customer lists, marketing data, and other assets developed through illegal gaming activities.
Barring the use of these fruits of corruption is essential to protecting California consumers, not to mention the integrity of state-sanctioned gaming. It is equally vital to ensuring an even playing field for all licensed participants. Companies that have engaged in any form of unlawful or unauthorized gaming, internet gaming, should be disqualified from licensure. These bad actors should not be rewarded with the opportunity to offer internet poker websites to and profit from Californians. The same is true for companies that purchase their tainted assets on the hope of profiting from these ill-gotten gains. This should hardly be controversial. As noted in Senator Dianne Feinstein's April 28 letter of opposition to this bill, sites such as PokerStars, now owned by Amaya Gaming, provide a ready avenue for money laundering and other possible offenses. She also noted concerns by the FBI regarding transnational organized crime groups. We work tirelessly 24 hours per day to protect our brick-and-mortar facilities from illicit activity. We do that to protect our patrons and our business. We follow the rules to honor the compact with the state. In that same vein, we urge this body, when considering whether and how to authorize a major expansion of gaming in California, to take steps to ensure that we maintain the highest integrity among operators. The bill you have been asked to approve falls far short of that charge. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. I assure you I will not take 6 minutes today.
You get 2.
I get 2. I'm going to take the full 2 maybe. Madam Chair and members, I'm Jeff Gruby, Chairman for the Agua Caliente Band of Cui Indians. I expressed our opposition to AB 2863 last week and must reaffirm that today as the bill is proposed to be amended. We were just informed yesterday of these amendments, and we have had little opportunity to review the portions of them, which is also likely the case of most of you on the committee here today. We oppose the bad actor and tainted assets provisions in these amendments. We don't think that they even apply to the worst violators of the federal law. We don't think that $20 million get-out-of-jail-free card is appropriate for anyone who might still be captured by these carefully written provisions. With that said, we look forward to a robust discussion of this proposal on the Assembly floor, should it pass today. None of these policy amendments we heard or discussed in the Policy Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have additional speakers in opposition.
Yes, Pilar Oñate Quintana here for the Barona Band of Mission Indians, also in opposition for the reasons stated by the 2 chairmen. Thank you.
Paula Treat on behalf of the Pechanga Band of Luiseño Indians in opposition.
Morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Viviana Becerra on behalf of the Viejas Band of Kumeyaay Indians, also opposed unless amended. Thank you.
Good morning. Mike Lyons on behalf of Table Mountain Rancheria in opposition unless amended.
Phil Recht on behalf of Lytton Rancheria in opposition.
Paul Bauer on behalf of the Coalition to Stop Internet Gaming in opposition.
Thank you. Department of Finance?
No file on this.
I think we have some questions. Do you want to take the questions first? I know you want to respond, but Mr. Quirk?
I'll just make a statement, which is the opposition has brought up some good points, but I believe those are policy points that should be addressed on the floor. Right now, this committee is to look at the fiscal effects. I believe the fiscal effects have been addressed by the chair working with the author, and so I will be voting in the affirmative to let this out. I will definitely want to know more and learn more before I vote on the floor. Thank you all very much.
Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gray, last week in your presentation we had a somewhat tongue-in-cheek conversation about whether or not this regulation would also apply to other kinds of video games played over the internet, and I expressed my opinion to you that the bill, as currently stated, is too broadly worded. Those concerns I still continue to have, and I just want to confirm with you that the intention of the bill is to regulate poker games where people play for money, and that other kinds of video games, the intention is not to regulate them. It's the exchange of money that's the operable item here. And if the bill moves forward today, would you commit to working with me the next time the bill is amended, as I'm sure it will be as it works its way through the Senate, to address those concerns?
Certainly, that is my intent, to apply this to internet poker and not other types of internet games. I've already instructed my staff to reach out to your office, put together some language, and be happy to take those amendments as we go forward to further clarify that.
All right. Well, thank you. When we say internet poker, I mean, it's very important to me that the operable item be the exchange of money. So, for example, if someone's playing a poker video game, could be against other people, but you can't win actual money. I would think that is not included in the scope of the things that the bill that this bill regulates. Is that your understanding as well?
It is.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Calderon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gray, first, I'm sure this has been quite a nightmare of a process, not only for you, but for everybody, both in support and in opposition to this bill. It's a big issue, and really, as a state, we have to evaluate whether or not we're going to have any internet poker in this state or not. And that's what the issue comes down to. And so I applaud your endurance and your ability to stick in there, even when it maybe didn't look so good and things got tough. The only question I had is, when it comes to those that were, I don't know if it's a question or more if it's just a statement. When it comes to those that were operating illegally in the state, I do have a concern just overall when it comes to just allowing them, period, to even be in this state. Now, I understand, or to operate at all in this state. Now, I understand that compromise is always good, and I'm willing to consider a compromise. In terms of the $20 million number of a one-time fee to be able to kind of not wait the time, but just pay the $20 million fee, how did you come to that number? The $20 million?
Working very closely with the appropriations chair.
Okay. My only concern is that $20 million, it seems like to these companies, they could do a lot more and maybe should do a lot more because of the way they've been operating in our state illegally. But I think that what you've done is you've done a lot of work, and that you deserve to continue to have an opportunity to move this legislation forward and to continue to work on the issue. Obviously, we're going to keep having conversations on the floor when it comes to the floor, and also going through the Senate. So would love to be a part of that process anywhere or any way that I can be helpful to try and reach a resolution that everybody can be satisfied with. But I plan to be supportive today, and I thank you for your work and look forward to continuing working with you, and I move the bill.
Thank you, Senator Calder, for that question. Let me clarify a couple of things. In the bill, as amended here in committee, any operator who was blatantly operating illegally is found unsuitable in the bill as it reads today. Post-2011, when we had absolute certainty. There is a gray period between 2006 and 2011. If you operated during that period, that's where the potential 5-year penalty box and or $20 million comes into play. In addition to that, if any of your CEO, your board members, anybody who holds more than, I think, 10% in shareholder was involved in the blatantly illegal gaming, they are banned permanently from the state of California to do internet poker business. So I just wanted to make sure, I certainly will strive to further revise the bill to make it even stronger. As it stands today, it is undoubtedly the strongest bill in the country. And it should be. That's the kind of work we want to do with this legislation, and we will continue to do so. And thank you for your comments and your support.
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher.
Yeah, as a first-term member, I can now fully appreciate why this thing has taken so long and how this has been sort of a battle over 10 years. And certainly there's times I think I and others have even just said, hey, why even do this? Because maybe the status quo is, maybe we should just leave the status quo. Unfortunately, I think on the balance, I think that would be the wrong temptation because there still is obviously a black market out there. There is consumers out there playing internet poker, and they don't have any protections. And I think ultimately that swings the balance towards we have to work on something. That's why this has been being done. I know there's been a lot of work by a lot of people on trying to make sure this is a fully informed bill that addresses all of the issues. I think suitability language, making sure that's really tight, is something that still needs to be I think we have some good language here, but I think this is a process, and I think we need to continue to look at that and make sure that we're really got a tight language there to ensure that that the highest level of integrity is kept in gaming in California. I know there was an issue raised about some of the language about does this pardon bets processed offshore. I didn't know if that was one of the latest things brought up. Does the language as written pardon those bets? Is that something that you've looked at, Mr. Gray? And or is that something that you plan to address kind of going forward?
Pardon the bets as in the player?
Right, and that there was in the suitability language that the way it's written, it could potentially pardon bets that were made offshore.
I'll be happy to take a look at that and maybe sit down with you specifically on that issue.
Right.
Certainly, if you were taking illegal bets at a time when you shouldn't have, we've established those dates in the bill. You're banned from the market here in California. The extent to which how that effectuates players that may or may not have, we'll certainly have to take a look. I know Mr. Wagner raised some similar issues about some of the language in the bill that we tend to address. So happy to sit down and kind of figure that out with you. Right,
and I know you've been doing a lot of work to address all these issues. I do feel like we're moving in the right direction. And so I'm going to support this bill today. I feel, putting in the 2006 date with these new amendments and some of the other provisions that have put in it, we're moving in the right direction. And so I can support this bill today.
Thank you.
Mr. Wagner.
Couple of things, and first, a sincere thanks to the author who has talked with me and tried to work through some of my concerns, and I know has done yeoman's work with supporters and opponents of the bill. I echo Mr. Calderon's comments and congratulations along those lines. I want to get there. I think, unfortunately, we have to have the discussion here because the floor is not conducive to debate. In fact, we're not allowed to do debate there, and questions often get answered and then dodged in closings as opposed to actually dealt with as they can be in committee. So unfortunately, this may be our last chance before we get to the floor, which is why I think I've got to raise some of what I'm hearing. I understand the effort to fix the suitability problem and to move the date, but I don't know that that truly addresses the opposition's concerns. You have someone who everybody says was a bad actor, and you give with the new process, a new date and an opportunity to establish that the individuals may not themselves have been the bad actor, but that doesn't reach the so-called tainted asset. And the question I have is that while I don't believe the, quote, death penalty for a company would be appropriate, I don't think that it would be fair for us to let them take an asset that they developed illegally and profit from it today. So it's not a matter of when were the individuals involved and are they bad actors, but does the name, for example, Poker Stars, to pick the obvious one, does the email lists and the player lists, does that confer an unfair market advantage to them? The opponents say it does. The proponents say, and they've told me the asset, it's an old email list. It doesn't have that much value any longer. I understand that. The bill, though, as I understand it, doesn't give anybody the opportunity to test that question or to simply ban the list and let them develop new customers like everybody else is going to have to do. Has that been discussed? Are we trying to move in that direction? What's wrong with a flat prohibition on the so-called tainted asset and the names and say, start from scratch like everybody else is doing? That's the solution to the problem, I would think. Where am I wrong? Has that been addressed? Help me.
Certainly that's been discussed at length. The bill, as it stands before you today, has a 3-year blackout period on those very lists that you discussed. Could we go further to just permanently ban the list? I suspect we could, and be willing to open to those discussions. We kind of keep moving the dial around as to what the appropriate, bad actor suitability provisions are. In addition to that, we empower the Commission, when issuing the license in this bill, to determine if, in addition to the list, if there were any other assets that provide an unfair competitive advantage. And when they issue your license, can issue a conditional license with those specific conditions on it to remove any other lists and or other assets that they deem inappropriate or ill-gotten gains. So I think it's an important issue that you raise. I think it's one we've tried to address in this bill. And I don't know, like you, Mr. Wagner, I don't know the value of those lists. I know by reports those lists have been sold 3 or 4 times since this period of illegal activity. So are they still valuable? Are they not? I'm not in a position to make that judgment. I suspect I might be able to get a better list from Facebook, who probably knows everybody in the world that's likes poker. But having said that, I think it's something we did try to address in the bill, and are willing to have further discussions with you if you feel there's a better approach.
Well, I just to finish the thought, and you did it again. I mean, you talked about suitability, and I don't see that as a suitability issue. Mm-hmm. I think that's a competitive issue, whether or not there's an advantage there. I agree with you. Facebook's probably got better lists. Good luck getting it. But at the end of the day, it's you or I might be completely suitable to run these companies, and yet the asset that we are using is itself the problem. And I don't know that the bill takes that sufficiently into consideration yet, because I do think that's a legitimate concern from the opposition.
Again, I'm willing to sit down with you and go into it at length. I'm not sure where we want to land on the decision. I mean, if you were the chairman or shareholder of a major bank that engaged in some illegal activity and was fined and subsequently sold to another owner, then do we hold the other shareholders and or owners responsible for the previous? That's kind of the public policy debate we're having. I'm not sure anyone's been able to provide an example in any other area where we have done that. But certainly, I am willing to strengthen this bill in and around the tainted assets issue, of which is addressed in the bill. But if we want to strengthen it further, I'm open to that dialogue, and certainly any suggestions that members of the committee have going forward. I mean, I'm sure we will amend this bill further on the floor. I'm sure we will amend it further in the Senate. And so the extent to which members of this committee have suggestions, I have, this has probably been the most vetted bill this legislative session. We've had weekly stakeholder meetings. We've done series of amendments. We've addressed both areas of concern and continue to be at the table with both the supporters and the opposition to make further revisions. In fact, if we held every bill in this process to the standard we've held this bill, we wouldn't have any bills. But nonetheless, I will sit down with you, Mr. Wagner, and address that specific concern.
Mr. Holden.
Mr. Gray, I would join in with the others who would congratulate you on your efforts, and those who are the proponents, who I respect, and clearly respect those who are the opponents on this measure. And yes, it has been vetted, but probably with good cause. When you have operators who've been operating illegally and now you're trying to create a legal system, there are some important threshold questions that have to be addressed. And I guess for me, part of it is, teetering on what Mr. Wagner said is, does this committee take ownership of this issue and try to figure it out here, or do we allow it to pass through because it's a fiscal committee and we've sort of, based on the chair's leadership and your own, have met the threshold of question for this committee. I am completely undecided on the merits of this bill in terms of which way to go. I will support it to allow it to make its way to the next level of conversation. It will be in a committee of one. The floor is as good a place, I think, as any, and I think we'll have opportunities before the bill even gets on file or gets before us to hear from everyone and be able to continue to weigh in, and I appreciate your desire to want to do that. And even those who spoke, there was still, at least of what I heard, opposition, but with the willingness to support the bill if amended. I don't know exactly what that means to everybody who spoke, but I think that is a good sign, and I hold myself open to continue to hear from both sides and refine my position on it. But at least for today, I am prepared to support the bill to allow it to move forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Garcia.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chairman of GO, thank you for bringing this bill forward. I'd like to speak a little bit about the amendment number 4 and to the area that you referred to as the gray period, with no pun intended there. I asked at the last hearing whether or not there was a legal opinion that we've had rendered for us here at the state as it relates to this 2006-2011 period, again, that you refer as to the gray period, whether or not there were assets that were obtained illegally. And I think that would certainly help us determine one direction or another as it relates to the suitability language that we're talking about here in Amendment 4. Just to piggyback off of some of the comments that were made by the Assembly member from Montebello, he touched on the $20 million fee and the question of how we came about to landing there. I think that just the simple fact of the vetting and regulatory process for these potential licensees could potentially cost more than $20 million, and the oversight on an ongoing basis on all of the licensees that I think the state should be on a regular basis, be checking in on to make sure that no illegal activity is taking place. I mean, we do that when it comes to Indian gaming regulation. I think the commissions can come in 4 times a year and check in and make sure that everything is, as they say, on the up and up. And so I think we need to be looking at it from that perspective when we're looking at a fee. But I would say, and I'm of the mindset that if we were to determine that between 2006 and 11 they did obtain these assets illegally, that the word "unless they pay a fee" should not be there, and that it should be that they do pay a fee if we are deciding to allow folks to get into the market and obtain a license. And so I think that is an area that I think we should work on if in fact it is determined that these assets were obtained illegally, that it's not unless you pay, that it is that you do pay, and that fee be far more than $20 million for the simple fact of the licensing process and the regulation that will take place at that point and beyond. I also think that the 5-year penalty box period is certainly a good start, but I believe that it also should be predicated on when the first licensee is issued, that the clock begins to tick when that 5-year window is initiated. I think we're talking about, I've heard the word competitive advantages. Well, I think that certainly has something to do with when that clock starts ticking. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of addressing both the suitability, getting a legal opinion, the $20 million fee that's being proposed, and the language that says unless they pay. I believe that they should pay, and not just, well, you'll get a license if you pay. So the other areas is that I know we are talking about the regulatory agencies having some oversight and control to determine a lot of the issues related to the tainted assets. Perhaps there could be some stronger language or some direction that we can give to these regulatory agencies that could give everyone involved the comfortness in knowing that there are some thresholds that need to be looked at by these regulatory agencies. Lastly, and this probably is something that has not come up in the conversations, but we've had some visits in the past couple of weeks from non-gaming tribes, and at some point, I think if we are in a position to address the needs from the racetrack industry, and we would be, in this particular case, giving them $60 million. What role and what position do we put the non-gaming tribes when it comes to this issue? And that's been raised by a number of different entities that have come visit us that are non-gaming tribes here in California. I think there's anywhere between 40 and 50, or maybe it's the other way around, where you have about 50 or 60 non-gaming tribes and then about 50 gaming tribes. So I'd like for us to take a look at that. And lastly, there's something that we know as a special distribution fund when it comes to tribal gaming in California. We ought to be considering some type of fund that could be available to mitigate the impacts of internet poker gaming here in California, and making sure that we're addressing the unintended consequences that happen in society and in our communities as a result of gaming. And so those are some of the areas that I'd like for us to take a look at. I know this is a fiscal committee, but as been mentioned, I mean, this is really the first opportunity that we actually get to engage into the public policy side of it publicly. We've had conversations with you on an ongoing basis where we can at least deliberate these issues and come to some kind of consensus or conclusion. So those are the areas that I like for us to continue to take a look at. There remain some concerns, but we will support the bill for the simple fact that we appreciate the work that you've done, and that this conversation should continue.
Ms. Bonilla.
I would just say that I agree with a lot of the comments of my colleagues. I want to thank the chair for her work to move the bill forward in the right direction, but very interested in the comments Mr. Garcia just shared, and wanted to, I guess, reiterate that I too am taking a perspective of this being an appropriations vote, and looking forward to seeing how the outstanding issues are addressed. Thank you.
I think Mr. Quirk had an additional question.
When we talk about tainted assets, I think the largest tainted asset here is the PokerStars name. The PokerStars founders, the people who profited, they're long gone. We can't punish them anymore. The point here is the PokerStar name a tainted asset because it was made so popular during this 06 to 11 period? And I would very much like to discuss this with you. I don't think we should be banning the Canadian company that happened to buy PokerStars, but I have somebody could convince me otherwise, but I don't think that's the right solution. I think the question is the PokerStars name a tainted asset? Thank you.
Madam Chair, would you like me to respond?
Yes, please.
To the well, I'll start with Mr. Garcia's questions, and thank you.
Before, let me go ahead and throw mine in as well. I didn't know you were going to go back to Mr. Garcia. I'm sorry.
Well, I've been keeping fastidious notes for all of you.
Good. Obviously, on a procedural matter, I have a motion by Mr. Calderon. A second by Mr. Quirk. Thank you. I just want to state, we've worked through these, and I'm sure I associate myself, just because I really want to say this, with some of the concerns brought by Mr. Wagner. That doesn't happen often. And, of course, Mr. Garcia, who I think laid out a lot of the issues, and we've had this discussion. This is an appropriations committee. We have decided to not to take your lead on this suitability, but I think that there are very real concerns. You have committed to me that you will continue to work with the opposition, that you'll continue to work on the floor. I think, like so many people, we have to ensure that, like so many other people spoke, we have to ensure that this is really going to work and work for everybody. I think that there is a market component and a market share component that needs to be addressed, and I believe that there is a question, and I think the legal question about that activity between 2006 and 2011. I hope we can resolve some of this before this comes to a vote on the floor, because as you've heard here, and I think as we know, it will, I think, prevent a vote from being successful on the floor, it would require a 2/3 vote. So I know we're going to continue to work on that. Some other issues we've talked about briefly that if it's going to be amended on the floor, some things I would like to see is a clear distinction of what happens in the future if horse racing is no longer an activity that the state of California engages in. And I don't mean to, I know that's a religion to some folks, but we have a colleague who helped redefine a lot of animal activities. And so I just want to make sure that in this bill, it's clear that this is not a right of the original horse owners or the industry to this money if horse racing, for some reason, does not continue. I want very clear language that this is the intent of a structure for iPoker and not iGaming in general. We've had a lot of discussion, but it's particular to poker. I don't want any. I want to be very clear. I could not and would not vote for a bill that even in this structure that allowed for iGaming. I think that would put our brick and mortar businesses out of business, quite frankly. I think the bad actor language, we need to figure that out, and we need to strengthen it. And we need to continue to work on this. I do want to thank you for this. I want to thank you for filling in the blanks. The one thing I assured the opposition as well early on is we're going to have a bill that comes out of here. And we have a bill. And it addresses everything that needs to be addressed. I think we just need to continue to strengthen that language on the floor. So I want to thank you for that work. I just wanted to throw in my horse racing obsession. Sorry. And the fact that this is about iPoker only.
Yeah. Certainly it is about iPoker only, Madam Chair, and in fact there's a line specifically inserted into the bill to address that specific concern, because we have, again, amended this thing endlessly to address all of these concerns, and we continue to be open to additional amendments. And I want to thank the entire committee for your thoughtful questions and suggestions. Let me go through some of those concerns. Mr. Garcia raised codifying regulations and regulatory practices, and we do that in this bill. Highly unusual. Normally, when you go for licensure, we have a commission that handles that activity and licensed gaming activities in this state that does a very thorough job of making sure that we do not license bad actors. But in order to relieve the concerns of the opposition, we said, okay, let's go further. Let's take those practices and let's codify them in the bill so they're very specific, so that everyone, almost as if we are legislating the job of that commission. And that's what we were doing in this bill. Highly unusual, highly thorough. Mr. Quirk raised, we can't punish the folks that were previously in this market. I would respectfully disagree, sir. We do punish those folks in this bill. We say if you engaged in those illegal activities, you will not be suitable for licensure here in California. So we make that very clear. The tainted assets issue. We have multiple provisions in the bill putting blackout periods on tainted assets, empowering the commission to limit tainted assets. So we take that issue seriously and address it in the bill, and we'll continue to refine that to appease everyone's concerns. At the beginning of this process, members, we had two issues: horse racing, bad actor suitability, two unresolved issues. Most of the rest of this bill has been thoroughly vetted over the course of a decade before this body. We sat down at the beginning of the year and we laid out a schedule, spoke with stakeholders, industry folks, consumers, et cetera, and said, okay, we're going to have a schedule of legislation here. And much of what we do here is dictated by our schedule. But we sat down and said we're going to address horse racing in the GO committee. We are going to address the fiscal components before the fiscal committee. And we are going to commit to addressing additional suitability standards by the floor. We put it in writing. Folks weighed in writing in return. We are ahead of schedule with the help of the chairperson here. We have put suitability in the bill now, before we get to the floor, as the agreed upon kind of calendar of events in negotiating this particular legislation. We are going to continue to refine that and take all of your considerations and suggestions into making it an even better bill than it is today. But I do want to make sure that it is understood that every single concern raised, with the exception of Mr. Olnoti, is already addressed in the bill in some fashion. We can debate the merits of is it strong enough, but all of those concerns that you all raised here today are in the bill. So I just want to make sure there's not a misunderstanding, or if anyone hasn't had a chance to review the bill in its entirety, that all of those issues are addressed. And so I will continue to work with each and every one of you, specific to the questions you raised, to strengthen those specific provisions that you're talking about. But please know that what you're concerned about, many folks are concerned about. I also want to thank not just the chair, but the vice chair of appropriations here and the vice chair of GO, one and the same, Mr. Frank Bigelow, who's been a great asset in negotiating this issue in both committees, and I look forward to working with you to further revise these things on the floor.
All right, so I'm going to take that as your close. We have a motion by Mr. Calderon, a second by Mr. Quirk. That gets out on an A roll call with Mr. Jones voting no, Mr. Wagner, Ms. Eggman, Mr. Santiago, and Ms. Weber not voting.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members.